Hello, I'm Lisa Reynolds from Learning and Teaching Services, and in today's session we're going to talk about setting up your gradebook for higher ed. So in this session we're going to look at the following topics. We're going to do an overview of the gradebook, we're going to look at accessing your gradebook, going into the gradebook setup, the types of aggregation we should use, how to handle formative assessment, how to add scales if you, for example, have a pass-fail overall unit, and we're going to look at a very simple manual calculation. So firstly, we need to be able to access our gradebook setup, and to do that we can either from our unit homepage go to administration and then find gradebook setup, or if you're already within the gradebook, go to the menu at the top of the page and under setup choose gradebook setup from there. Now in Moodle we have a number of aggregation types. The two that we recommend that you use are either weighted mean of grades or natural aggregation. Now to choose an aggregation method you need to go to your category settings for your parent category, which will usually have your unit code on it. It's at the very top of the gradebook setup page. And under there we're going to go to our actions and we're going to go edit and then edit settings. And then from our grade category settings we're going to look at our aggregation menu and choose the one that we want to. Once we've chosen our aggregation type, we can then scroll down and click Save Changes. So a little bit more on our aggregation types. Natural aggregation is possibly the most straightforward of the two recommended types. Now what it will do is it will look at what your maximum grades are for the unit overall, and it's going to give them a weighting based on what it thinks they're worth as a percentage of the total for the unit. So as long as your maximum grades add up to 100, then those maximum grades should match the weights column in Moodle. So you can also override what Moodle gives a particular item by clicking the checkbox to the left-hand side of the weights column, and then your grades will be recalculated. You'll see a message to say that's happening, and it will say that your weights have been adjusted to total 100. That can do a little bit of strange things, as you can see in our slide. It's recalculated slightly different there, so you have to be a little bit careful with that. The other aggregation type that we recommend you use is weighted mean of grades. So this one allows you to allocate a weighting to each of your items that you can express as a decimal. So for example, on our screen there, 0.25 would equal 25%. So using this aggregation method, your maximum grade can be anything you want to mark out of, as long as it's up to 100, but your weightings for each of the items need to total 1 overall, so it can't be more than 1. So in Moodle, there's a couple of different ways that you can also handle formative assessments. So if you need to exclude stuff that's formative or non-graded from your unit total, you can either add a category, give that category a grade type of none, or use weighted mean of grades or natural aggregation and weight that particular item at 0.0. So let's put that into practice. So here we are in our Moodle unit, and we're going to go to administration and find our gradebook setup. So now we're in our gradebook setup, and first thing we're going to take care of is we have a couple of items. We have a formative assessment and a blog that we don't want to add into our unit total. So what I'm going to do to take care of them is I'm going to add a category. I'm just going to call my category formative, and we're going to give it a grade type of none, and we're going to save our changes. And there it is at the bottom of our gradebook setup page. Now to move my items, over on the right hand side under my select column, I'm going to check the boxes for those two items, And then down at the bottom of my page here, I'm just going to go to my Move Selected Items menu, and I'm going to choose my formative category. And that will move my items into that category. So there they are now. You'll see it's weighted that at 0.0, so nothing that's within that category is going to aggregate into your unit total. So now let's look at our aggregation type. So we want to be up here on our parent category. That one is usually going to say your unit code. And we're going to go over to our Actions menu here, and we're going to go Edit Settings. And under here you'll see we have our aggregation menu. So we've got a choice of either weighted mean of grades or natural. I'm going to choose natural in this first instance and save my changes. And that's going to reset the aggregation for my unit. Now you'll notice here we have our maximum grades, and we're marking out of what each assessment item is worth as a percentage. So it's all adding up to 100. And you'll see we have our items here and they are matching. Now our category isn't going to aggregate. If we needed to override it, however, I can check the box next to it and I can just make sure that it's 0.0, and that will then make sure it doesn't aggregate into that unit total down the bottom here. So that would be all you would need to do in this case. If you are marking out of different maximum grades, perhaps say your maximum grades were all out of 100, we'll go and have a little look at an example of what that would look like. So we're going to go again and edit, and we're going to edit our settings. And this time we're going to choose weighted mean of grades, and again save our changes. And now you'll see our weights column has been reset and they're all on the default of 1.0. So we can't have anything greater than a 1 within our gradebook. So we have to reconfigure those and tell Moodle what each item is worth as a percentage. So in this case, these maximum grades could be whatever you want them to be. You could mark out of 100, you could mark out of 80, you could mark out of 65. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is this weighting in the column, which tells Moodle how much of a percentage of this unit total is that item worth. So in this case, we're going to put in 0.2 for our 20%, 0.3 for our 30, and 0.5 for our 50% exam. So we'll just save our changes there, and then that is all you have to do, except we need to just weight our category at 0.0 again to make sure that's not going to add anything in. And now you will have just your 3 assessment items up the top here, adding into your unit total. So the next thing we're going to look at is using scales within your assessments. So you can also use scales within each assessment piece, and to do that you would need to go to the actual assignment, and you would need to edit the settings, go into your administration, edit settings, and then grade. Open up your grade settings, and then under your grade settings you'll find your grade type, and under there you can change your grade type from point to scale, and then choose from your available scales. So for example, if you had a pass-fail unit overall, you would choose pass-fail, and then you will get a scale drop down instead of a field to pop in your grade. We can also in the gradebook add custom scales if we want to. So to do that, we would need to be in our gradebook. We can go then to the grader report menu at the top of the page, go down and find scales, and then click view, and then you've got a button where you can add a new scale. So just note that the scale must begin with the lowest part. So if we were talking about, say, our letter scale, it would start with the F for fail and work your way up to the HD, and separating each of the items in the scale with a comma. So if you do have a pass-fail overall unit, there's one more thing you need to do, and that is to change your letter grade set to the pass-fail one. So that'll give you your PN for passed, ungraded, and so on. So to do that, again, from our gradebook, we need to go to our CQ Uni grader report, go and find our setup, and then find unit grade settings. And then under our grader report settings, we can change that final default final letter set from grades to pass-fail. And if you do have a pass-fail unit, just another tip, you'll need to override the unit letter and give your appropriate grade once all your grades have been entered, as this won't auto-calculate. So let's put that into practice. So firstly, let's go find an assignment, and we're going to edit it. We can either edit it by going to the menu and choosing edit settings, or if I was already within the item, I could then go administration and edit settings. So once we've got our assignment settings open, we would need to scroll down, find our grade settings, span those out, and under our grade type we would choose scale instead of point, and then from our scales menu we can then choose pass-fail, scroll on down and save and return to update your assignment, and now that assignment would have the pass-fail scale. The next thing we're going to look at is adding a scale. So we're going to go and view our scales. And under our scales here, you'll see we have some custom scales already. You can see the standard scales also. If I click add new scale, I can give my scale a name. We'll go with just pass-fail. And then I need to start, of course, with the fail, which is the lowest part of the scale, separate with a comma, put in my highest part of the scale. I can put a description if I want to, and save changes, and that will then appear in your list of custom scales. The other thing we need to look at is how to change our final letter set if we're using scales. So in this case, we're going to go to our setup again and choose our unit grade settings. So under our unit grade settings, we need to scroll down until we find our CQ Uni grader report settings, and we want to change our unit final grade letter set, and it will default to grades. If you have a pass-fail unit overall, you need to set it to pass-fail, scroll on down and save your changes. So the final thing I want to talk about today is manual calculations. Occasionally for more complicated assessment setups, for example minimum pass marks, compulsory res school attendance and so on, you may have to do a manual calculation to get your unit total to be correct. You'll find there are some specific examples on the Moodle help site at the URL on the screen, and that can be helpful for getting you to understand the setup. For today, we're just going to talk about a very simple example. So to add a manual calculation, again, we need to go to our Gradebook setup page, and in there we need to edit the calculation for the unit, so that's the unit total calculation. And in there we would give each of our assessment items that we want to be part of that aggregation, we would give those each an ID number. So in this example, we've got 3 assessments and we're giving them an ID number of A1, A2 and A3. So that's just so we can identify them for the equation we're going to do. The next thing we have to do is then add our calculation. So we need to put in an equal sign. We need to have our square brackets there. and inside those square brackets you would have your ID number. In this case, I'm just doing one that is simply to add up the total as an example. And once we had that calculation added, we would then save our changes. Now that's going to completely bypass any other aggregation type that is on your gradebook, and it will only run from that manual calculation. Once you have added a manual calculation into your unit, you'll also no longer see the aggregation settings when you go in and edit your parent category. So if you do find that is happening and you don't want to use that manual calculation, you need to then go back in and delete it to restore that functionality. Other thing to also note is that calculations may break on unit rollover. Occasionally this issue happens perhaps when an assessment is deleted as well, and you'll often see when that does happen, you'll get a lot of hashtags within your square brackets, which basically means the item is either been deleted or it's lost its ID number. So you need to fix those things up. So let's have a little look at that. Let's put that into practice. So again, from our gradebook setup, we need to go down to our unit total and go to our actions and then edit our calculation. Once you've edited your calculation, you'll see I've already got some ID numbers in here. So there are our ID numbers for each of our items. If I needed to add another one, there would be a field next to that item, and I could simply add my A4, for example, in there to add this item into my aggregation. As a side note, if you need to change these ID numbers, you can't do it from the gradebook setup. You have to go back into the assessment item, and you'll be able to change that ID number under the assessment settings. So let's pop in our calculation. So we need to pop in our equals sign. We need to pop in our square brackets. We would then go A1 for assessment 1, put in our closing brackets, put in our plus, add in our opening brackets, A2, closing brackets, plus again, and the same for A3. And that's going to be a very simple calculation to add your assignments up. Obviously, if you're using manual calculations in real life, you'll probably have something more complicated than this. But this is just an example to show you how it can be done. So once I've added in my equation, I can then save my changes, and then my gradebook will be running just off that calculation and not off the aggregation that has been added. We can then see, if we go in and look at the settings for our parent category, we now have no aggregation menu there. So to get back our aggregation menu, we'd have to go and delete our manual calculation from our unit total, and that will then restore that for me. So thank you very much for attending this presentation. If you have any questions regarding specific issues with your gradebook, you can contact me at l.reynolds@cgu.edu.au. Thank you again.